This is the Great State Mural, Mongolia Portrayed, our bi-weekly podcast that analyzes the current developments, deepest structures, and the joys of contemporary Mongolia. My name is Anand, and I'm a journalist based in Ulaanbaatar.
And I'm Dolgion. I'm a development and research professional currently based in Phnom Penh.
And this is Julian, and I am back home in Mannheim.
So Julian, so you were in Mongolia for almost a week, right?
Yeah, 8 days in early April, that's right.
Yes, so let's talk about it. How was your visit from the last time you were in Ulaanbaatar? What did you observe? What differences did you see? What discussions are people having in Ulaanbaatar?
Well, maybe to start off with, as always, I was very happy to be in Ulaanbaatar. It's a balm for the soul, these visits to Mongolia, so I was very pleased to be there. One of the interesting things about being a regular but widely spaced visitor is that I notice changes perhaps a bit more in a pronounced way than maybe locals do, like you, Anand. So for many years now, I've sort of taken notes on some of these visits to say, hey, what's new, what's changed? They're mostly sort of infrastructure notes, Ulaanbaatar and countryside, and I have those on the blog, some of those for 15 years now that I keep updating. But there's some observations that are more maybe social phenomena or so, or just impressions and a bit of fun as well that I could talk about from this particular visit to see what's shifting in an interesting way in Ulaanbaatar.
Yeah, and I think this time what was special during your visit was that both you and Anand met up with our listeners or supporters of the podcast. So can you share how did it go? What were the key messages from our listeners?
Anand, how did it go? We had visitors, we had listeners come, so that's good.
Yes, we had more people come than we have expected, I think, right? Did you think that was an appropriate number of people, or
yeah, about a dozen, most of whom we knew, some of whom we didn't know.
Yes.
So it was, it's always lovely to connect with friends and acquaintances, but it was also nice to meet some new people.
Yeah. I was quite surprised, actually, the amount of people who showed up.
And what were the key messages or comments regarding the show so far?
We didn't have an agenda for the meeting. We didn't have a PowerPoint prepared, and we didn't hand out a questionnaire. So I'd say, Anand, right, that naturally conversation sort of flowed on all kinds of topics. But did you hear any comments about the podcast?
Not in particular. One thing they did comment was that, why are you guys not doing video podcast? Yes. I guess, yes, the video is very much in the demand, I guess. So we will consider that in future episodes, but at the moment, I feel like our setup is quite okay. Maybe if we want to expand things, we will consider that. But what do you think about doing a video podcast, Dejo?
I think it would require more preparation, of course. Right now, for example, I'm just recording this from my bedroom. I don't need to worry about preparing my looks or whatever. So I find
you look great all the time,
Thanks. So I would just, I think your videos, I also prefer videos. I would like to see people's faces when they speak. And also you can just have an option to just turn the video on and do your own things in the meantime. But having a glance at the speaker every now and then is pretty useful. So I agree with them that we can consider video.
It's so interesting because our own listening habits determine a little bit of the answer, right?
Yes.
I watch no videos. I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I never watch videos.
Same.
And I think that's in part because I typically listen while I'm doing something else. The classic is doing dishes, right? Or walking to the train or sitting on the train. And so for none of those activities, the video is even possible. And I have come to it's just an audio medium for me. And so the idea of watching, I mean, we see each other as we're recording. Yeah, you two look lovely, but it's not all that interesting to watch your face.
The video looks very lovely today, actually.
We need a special makeup artist hired.
or make the lighting poorer so that you can't really tell.
Yeah.
But if the people want video, I'm not opposed. It just doesn't match my own listening habits at all.
I'm not opposed also. Yeah, my listening habit is also the same. Most of the podcasts I've listened to in the past were always been audio, and I usually prefer audio. I've listened to a few podcasts that have video, but I cannot really get into like video. It's just I need, like, for me as a journalist, I always need a point A, a point B, and a point C. Like, things needs to progress, and when you just look at people who are not doing those things in any capacity, even if when they're talking, it's not for me. It's not a good. It's enticing. So, but we can do video in future formats, and maybe we'll think about hiring a makeup artist just for Dolgion, or me also.
all of us.
Oh, all of us. Okay.
I could start by shaving, but that's for future episodes.
And the stylist.
The one funny comment I received is a complaint that Anand and our voices are too similar. So I think I have to swap my German accent much more so you can tell that I'm not Anand. But short of that, maybe we just have to address each other by name more, so listeners without the image know who's speaking. Where obviously there's no confusion with your voice, Dolgion, but apparently our voices are similar.
Well, that's so interesting. But anyway,
it was lovely. Go for it, yeah.
So let's get back to your impressions from Ulaanbaatar. I think you really went there in the spring, and as we all know, spring is the time for politics, including street politics. If it's spring, we know there'll be at least 1 or 2 protests on the square, and huge changes and reforms happening in the government and everywhere. So I think you went there exactly at the right time.
For me, any time is the right time to go. But yeah, it was because, as you said, traditionally for the democratic era, spring is when demonstrations happen, right? So maybe one of the dominant impressions I got was you two had an episode, the last episode, to talk about the Tool Highway and all the agitation around that. And I have to say I was surprised or impressed, I'm not sure which it is. I didn't speak to a single person who had anything good to say about that project. The criticism and even the outrage seems to be pretty universal. And that extends to all, I would say, sort of the 3 aspects that you also highlighted in your discussion as the substance, and that is more roads don't alleviate traffic. The format of the lack of consultation, and so that this project was sort of snuck on people and suddenly announced without the proper consultation, even with the municipalities, so the districts within Ulaanbaatar and other aspects. And the final piece, grave concern about what kind of monies are being moved and are moving to whom and where for what purpose. So I find that noteworthy. Because and there were demonstrations on the square. They were relatively small, but consistent. And I also saw a bit of a cleanup effort on the mountain road, to a mountain road, when I went hiking on the Sunday, which some people mentioned was one form of protest. Take care of nature there. So what the impression I came away with, that for the last several years, whenever there have been demonstrations, the first response by most people is to say, "Oh, those are paid for. Those are hired demonstrators." And there's this terrible mistrust of the voicing of criticism that most Mongolians seem to assume is not genuine, that people aren't actually really being critical, but they're just making money. No one implicated that with the protest or the questions on this project. And so that's quite unusual. And I'm curious to see what this means politically. It does seem that if the mayor and in the end, if the MPP pushes through with this, there could be real anger amongst urban residents. Now, mind you, I just move around downtown in relatively educated, powerful, privileged circles. So I can't say anything about how this might play in a wider population. But at least in those circles, my sense was unusually unanimous disgust, really, not just disapproval, but disgust with this project.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you directly, as you mentioned, almost everyone you met was outraged by what was going on. So who did you see whilst you were there, and in which circles did you frequent?
Well, it's a good question. It's sort of my usual format when I'm at least just in the city. It's different in the countryside. But in the city, my primary communities are the ones that you would expect, right? They're the academics, the politicians, the close to politicians, the NGO world that observes politics, and the international community. And then I have some friendships with, what you might think of as sort of regular Mongolians, a little bit less privileged, but no, not you, Anand. But friendship, yes, but not privileged. So that's the impression, and that's why I do want to emphasize this caveat of this is a particular circle of Mongolians and of Ulaanbaatar residents, but at least in that group, the disgust was sort of universal.
You held few lectures at the Mongolian university. Maybe I wasn't able to attend those. Maybe can you talk about those and maybe talk about the pedagogy and then also the overall students' attitude from the last time you visited Mongolia?
Yeah, this was really a little bit of a surprise too. So I gave 2 lectures in political science at MUIS at the National University, and I also gave a couple other talks in other smaller formats. In the past, I have become somewhat reluctant to give lectures at the university, because the format in the past has been, or what seems to have been expected of me in the past, I stand in front, I share Western wisdom, I get no questions, and the only question I get is, well, what should Mongolia do? Which I severely dislike as a question, particularly in a democratic country. Julian is not the person that makes these decisions and has the answer to all these questions. So that's been in the past. And so I've become relatively reluctant to follow up on these invitations to give these lectures. But in this case, the topics, I talked a bit about accountability and the role of the media in democracy. The piece that really was quite different and very enjoyable was the lectures at MUIS were both had an hour and a half and then a coffee break and then another hour or so. I got a lot of questions from students, and there were a lot of students in both sessions. But I didn't sort of ask for a show of hands or so. My sense was these were students all the way from first year, so looking quite young, like late high school students, all the way to doctoral students, and got questions on all kinds of directions, and not just this typical tell us what to do question. So it really was quite enjoyable, and makes me wonder, I guess, two hypotheses. Either pedagogy is changing in the sense that in the past, I think people in these lectures followed pretty much this format they used for regular lectures. Professor stands up front, imparts wisdom. So either the teaching format in the university is changing and people are replicating that in lectures, or it could be some kind of generational shift where a set of younger people has different expectations of these kind of events than in the past.
And any questions that stand out from these new people who have different mindsets from the past?
I don't think it was the content of the question as much as the number and engagement of the questions. Because of the topics that I was speaking about, we spoke a fair bit about the media system, and this will be familiar to you even more, Anand. But there were a lot of pointers to, the media ecosystem, all the channels are owned by politicians, blah, blah, blah. To which my response is, well, turn them off. Don't listen to those people and tell all your friends not to listen, and identify the sources that offer different perspectives and emphasize those. I mean, you have some agency as a media consumer. But
it's very difficult, though.
It is, because I think increasingly there are not many sources that actually give you anything investigative or information. But right, but that's where you, I think, as a curious Mongolian, that's kind of up to people to take action themselves rather than to passively accept what the media offers. So that's a bit more of my answer rather than the questions. But a lot of the questions focus on the lack of agency vis-a-vis the media.
Yeah, well, I would like to maybe just go on a little bit of a tangent on disinformation in Mongolia. Like for me, I like that our Mongolian media is kind of free in a sense, but again, all of the media here usually follow the trend of like sensational news. So it's always like politicians doing something or just a lot of squabbles within it. Never a lot of analytical stuff, but it's hard to fault them because they're chasing the numbers of social media clicks and all that, and they don't really have the time or the resources to go after long form or like some kind of investigation, even if it doesn't have to be like a grand scale story. Like I've been curious about your observations about the paints all over the schools, the orange, and the turquoise. The turquoise paints all over the schools, which I've sometimes think it looks like pinkish, but I think that's a discussion for. So that could be like an investigation for some journalists. So why do we have these paints all over the place? And I think you talked about how when you ask people about it, they give like so many different variety of answers. Yes, and that could be like a good investigation, like a good question. They might not find the answer, but that would be a journalistic endeavor that I would love to listen to or I would love to read about. So, for like those kind of things that are missing in Mongolia, and at the moment there needs to be some kind of legal changes. Maybe get rid of the libel, the what do you call it? Yeah, the defamation out of the criminal code, and also put like clauses of like paid sponsorships, paid articles specifically, because that's one of the hardships of a lot of journalism in Mongolia, where even though some journalists would say like I would like to have, I'm going to put an addendum saying that this is paid. But the customer would say like, or the person who's paying the piece was like, oh, then we're going to shop elsewhere because there's hundreds of other media houses that are doing the same thing. So why bother? So those kind of changes I would like to see. Yeah.
So coming back to your observation, Julian, you mentioned that lecture formats were different and there were more participation and questions from the students. And I was just looking earlier at the Asian Democracy Network's report on Gen Z and the popular uprisings, protests, what happened in Bangladesh, Nepal, and Mongolia is included in that report as well. So in your observation, to what extent the lectures that you just gave and the participation of the youth in this linked perhaps, do you see changes in behaviors and participation of youth in Mongolia, at least in Ulaanbaatar, in the city center that you were going around? To what extent you see the Gen Z in Mongolia kind of similar to the global Gen Z movement, or do you see anything particular the quite Mongolian about the Gen Z there?
I think it's a little bit early, and I'm kind of shy about attributing sort of characteristics to generations anyway. But I think the question arises. I think I've seen enough of this, and these lectures were an example where I think that's what we want to keep an eye on for coming years, and we'll see it in other political expressions, demonstrations, voting behavior, and the like. For now, this was primarily a pedagogical experience, right? About the dynamics in the classroom. And of course, national university students are a highly select group and so forth, right? So the extent to which they represent a generation is also questionable. But so I think I'm alerted to some changes and myself wonder whether these are transitions that you might consider generational. And then the question of whether this is an international phenomenon becomes fascinating, and one that I think we'll all be interested in coming years.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think the fact that they can ask questions, perhaps, especially in Mongolian traditional classrooms, the power relations are very prominent. Like if you're a lecturer, you're someone senior and I shouldn't question, etc. But if the people are very willing to ask questions, perhaps the perception of power and their voices may be at least supported. They feel comfortable doing that in those environments, which seems like a good sign.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's essential on the media area too, Anand, right? Because the ability to critically question sources and reporting and analysis that's offered is essential to making a choice about your media sources and also becoming active as a consumer. So if questions as a format become more prominent in interactions, in terms of what that might do for democracy, it's hard for me to think of that as being harmful. I think that almost has to be positive. Something that I heard a lot about that's not positive is foreign disinformation. And a strong sense amongst many folks I spoke to that disinformation campaigns, and this is entirely Russian and Chinese is what people think about, are playing an increasingly prominent role. I hear some of this, and when I hear it from the international community, I'm often a little bit hesitant because the memory of the international community at large is roughly 3 years, because that's how long expats get appointed. And so oftentimes I hear these comments and I think back to, but wait a second, is there anything different from 6 years ago? Meaning 2 generations of expats. And in many questions, there is not. And I find myself sort of the old grumpy guy saying, well, look, I mean, I've been looking at this for 20 years and I've seen this 8 times. So that's my instinct. However, this was also a sense amongst Mongolians that last year when I had conversations, people talked about domestic malintentioned evil actors online with various bot campaigns, smear campaigns, particularly against prominent women, but not only, and tended to trace those to domestic political actors, whereas this year the conversation was significantly more about ties perhaps between these domestic actors and Chinese or Russian actors, or actual campaigns from Russia and China. I'm still not entirely persuaded, but was certainly took note that the conversation seemed to have shifted not just because of this 3-year attention span of some of the international community.
For me, I always think about like how in the past where Russia had like a huge like malinformation campaign against the Chinese. And in the 70s and the 60s, when the Soviet-Sino conflict was arising, I think from that, maybe we should. I feel like we need to look in that perspective more. Is that from what I've heard in the past is that Russia did put a lot of like information against like the Chinese, but I feel like with us we ran with it and then we kind of perpetuated even more. And I feel like it's a similar thing with now is that yes, there's a lot of disinformation, but we tend to overblow it even more as a nation, like with vaccines, with healthy eating, which is I'm very much very much disheartened by people not looking at things more critically. And now I see a lot of people who look at AI videos and can't even tell they're AI videos and push those videos as though they are real. And I'm very disheartened by that, those kind of things. Is that we need to have some kind of media literacy and maybe some kind of critical thinking, some kind of work towards those things. And if we push those things, I feel like it would be better. But I feel like, again, what you said is I agree. I totally agree, which is that those kind of disinformations happened in the past and it's still going. I don't think it's as huge as in the past before. Maybe there is some kind of sway from Russia or China to do something in Mongolia. But again, it's always been like that in the past. And
yeah, maybe technology has changed, right? And you mentioned AI and the ability to spread disinformation in different ways is a new concern and one that obviously we're all keeping an eye on. Since we mentioned sort of Chinese impacts, one other thing that was mentioned by a number of people that was surprising was that people are seeing Chinese families show up in sort of upper middle class housing and also in the private schools. And there was a bit of speculation in the conversations why that might be. Someone mentioned, for example, that the few schools in Ulaanbaatar that teach entirely in English, their tuition may be significantly lower than a similar offer in a secondary city in China. So maybe these are folks moving for the education of their kids. But we assume that there's a lot of business activities. But it's just kind of interesting that people mention, there's sort of, I don't know, regular Chinese families might be kind of a funny term, but there are Chinese families showing up in apartment buildings and also in the schools in a way that hadn't been mentioned to me before.
Yeah, and I think somebody even pointed out that the case for better schooling or cheaper schooling might not be the case, where the prices are almost even similar with what is in China. It might be even cheaper. So why even come to Mongolia? So that is a big question mark of why there's maybe some kind of influx of Chinese in Mongolia at the moment. Yeah. Do you have any?
Last summer, when I was there, I saw, at least around the Mois area, around the National University of Mongolia area, there were loads of Chinese places, like noodle places, ramen, that I haven't seen before. It was quite interesting. And also I was chatting to a few friends who also observed that. They were saying, yes, especially in areas like in the south around Desan, they see a lot of Chinese families. And, in Cambodia right now, there's a huge scandals of scam centers. A lot of Chinese nationals have been part of those, as both as victims and also as operators of those. I'm wondering if there's any link or any risk that Mongolia, as these scam centers have to find their next nest, that they actually target countries with low levels of law enforcement and capacity and high levels of incentives to receive bribery, etc. So they might, to what extent some of them are targeted because they can just do their work online.
Yeah. Well, we had a big crackdown in 2019 where the local authorities cracked down on a Chinese online gambling ring. Like 800 or so Chinese people were actually deported, and they were stopped because I guess their operation was it was cheaper to operate in Mongolia to do those kind of online gambling and maybe bypassed maybe the Chinese firewall. We did have those kind of crackdowns in the past, but I think I have not heard any kind of any kind of like those kind of scam centers at the moment. Maybe there are. Usually Mongolian authorities don't really reveal these kind of information until they do like a big sting operation.
Since we're talking about a bit of international trend, Julian, did you notice any effect of the global oil prices? What's happening in Iran-Israel war? Is this affecting people in Mongolia? Are they talking about it? What did you observe?
Yeah, good question, Lauren. First week of April, so schools were not in session, so traffic was relatively light because of the schools. So I wouldn't claim that people were using their car less because the gasoline prices have gone up. Now, in an international perspective, consumer gasoline is relatively cheap in Mongolia at roughly a US dollar per liter, somewhere around there, right? But of course, relative to purchasing power, that is quite expensive. The one piece, and I'll have a blog post coming out about this, the one piece where this did have an impact that was news to me, Dolgion, is the pipeline's back in discussion. And it has showed up. Yeah, it has showed up in the Chinese 5-year plan.
Between Russia and China.
Yeah.
But right. they closed down closed down the Russian offices here.
But it seems to be back as a topic, and the reason people were giving is that China is securing different sources when perhaps if the Strait of Hormuz is blocked longer term, or if sources like Iran or so become lesser, then they need other sources, and all of a sudden the pipeline becomes relevant again. Now, since this war has been caused by an erratic, unstrategic American president, it's really difficult to answer with long-term strategy because, maybe the ceasefire is going to work out somehow, right? But that was the one piece I heard that I was surprised, because I had thought the pipeline had died a long, slow death. But it seems to be vaguely back on the agenda. It has always, the main challenge to the idea of the pipeline has always been that the Chinese interest has been lukewarm at best. Clearly, the Russian interest is strong in selling, but the Chinese interest in buying is relatively muted, but perhaps that's changing.
I would like to add like 2 points to that, like for Mongolia's petrol prices, and in terms of, because Russia is gaining a lot of leverage over this war, we're supposed to gain. I guess it should be a lot cheaper, but it's not. And there's like a famous Dutch YouTuber who's actually traveling across Mongolia. Maybe in the past, maybe she's posting it now, but she was and her bike was like throttling or something, and then she was saying that it was due to the gas. Like it was due to the gas that she was using in Mongolia, basically. And she said, like, I never had this kind of an issue, or if it did, it's just such a bad kind of petrol gas, and it just shows to you like what kind of gas that what kind of quality of petrol we are using. And I think because of that, there is also a discussion of like air pollution is coming up, where so yes, the coal thing, the coal burning is an issue, but now people are realizing, it's also might be cars, which has always been also cars, 50-50, but people don't really like to point things at their cars. So those are the discussions that are quite prevalent at the moment. Not in terms of maybe the gas prices increasing because of the Strait of Hormuz.
Gas quality, very interesting. Just personal experience. 2 years ago during the election, I was in the countryside observing the campaign, and we drove from Tsaganur up to Murun across the mountains, and somewhere along the way had picked up a bad tank of gas. And we're smoking all kinds of ways on this car. And we're just hapless academic and election observers. What do we know when the car smokes, right? But by the time we got to Murun and called some friends, and then some drivers came by, their verdict was clearly it was bad gas. It was just low quality, even though we were in a diesel, which basically burns anything, right? But interesting, I had that experience of the poor gas quality as well.
Yeah, and I was reading that, petroleum price have been stabilized more or less, but diesel price have increased significantly in the last 1 month, 10 days, 2 weeks or so. And this will have a huge impact on, of course, agriculture and mining sector and industry especially, which will have knock-on effects on other prices. And currently Mongolia is experiencing high levels of inflation, and it's also causing a lot of stress to people of further price increases. Did you also notice when you go to supermarket, buy things, the everyday basket like prices? Everybody in Mongolia complains about we're paying global prices for everything, but obviously our salaries don't match that average at all.
I have to admit, I am not a price-sensitive grocery shopper in Mongolia. I do stay in an apartment just so I can make my own breakfast. So I actually do go shopping, but from visit to visit, I don't remember the price of milk the way I do, for example, in Germany or so. So I can't tell whether the price has gone up particularly.
Meat prices are up. No, I think Robert would be fuming if he hears that argument. Where he found out that actually meat prices in Mongolia fluctuate and is actually outside of the realm of inflation, because it's very much a locally sourced product, and it always fluctuates with seasons. But it's steadily growing a little bit, and I think there was one scandal of our new agriculture minister who didn't know meat prices were up, and he got made fun of on that issue. Okay, moving on from political and hard-hitting stuff. Any other things that you've observed during your visit, aside from politics and social change?
Did you have any fun at all?
Yeah, it's always I love these visits, so I have a ton of fun, and it makes me happy. But no, I had a little bit of an arts and culture theme to this visit, and one might speculate that I'm getting to a life stage and an age where one looks more at culture and culture products. But music and art, a little bit of a theme this time. I went to several art exhibits, contemporary art. And enjoyed those quite a bit. I saw an exhibit at the Han Art Gallery, which is over across the Peace Bridge, that featured the 4 artists that'll be in the Mongolian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. But it was not just the 4 of them, but other artists as well. That was enjoyable. There is a new cafe in the same building as the Mongolian Union of Artists, right on the corner there of Ulaanbaatar Square in Peace Avenue. That's really lovely. The coffee's okay, but there's a lot of artworks on the wall, and there's also sort of antique furniture, if you will, that classic chest that you see in people's gear, and that is often very nicely painted and decorated. There were examples of that. So those were new to me, and I got to know the works of a couple of contemporary artists that was interesting to learn about. I have a favorite Mongolian graffiti artist and have bought a couple pieces from him, and so bought a special edition T-shirt from him as well. I think it may be a little bit too hip for my age, so I might have to pass it on to my son, but enjoyed it in any case. Also, a very interesting, really kind of funky new space in an odd place called the Huchna Contemporary Art Space that's sort of in a weird office building, has a cafe, but has almost nightly music shows. I don't know whether this is my interest shifting and these sort of contemporary art scenes have always existed. I suspect that that's the case. But certainly was a highlight to me to discover. There's a new jazz bar. I've been going for many years to Fat Cat, which is sort of the granddaddy of the jazz bars. Now it has a little brother or a little cousin in the Bird Jazz Cafe, which is also quite nice on Peace Avenue, just across, just next to the Russian embassy, and is a smaller space but has some decent food. So a couple of sort of cultural events. Perhaps, and a little bit of design as well. That was kind of interesting. I did have a chance to see the Winter Olympics uniform that Goyo Kashmir had. Oh, they are, I mean, they look good on TV, but they are beautiful when you see them sort of in the flesh, actually. The sweaters are really very nice. Yes, definitely pricey, but really kind of original in its design too, with sort of a scene of a mountainside gear and a little bit of landscape in the sweater. Very interesting. The other piece I bought is a little gear lamp, a little designer item that's the shape of a gear with a really soft lighting and an orange cable and accents. Makes a really nice soft light. Fancy Mongolian design. Yay!
Okay, we'll check this out. For me, the Kashmir would be useless here. It's 38 degrees. 30 degrees.
You can wear it inside.
Gear lamp. Gear lamp for sure.
Yeah,
well, you can wear the Kashmir inside for all the air conditioning.
In the website notes to the episodes, if people are curious, they can check them out. Maybe the last thing I would mention that is a bit of a combination of the social change and pop culture was this workshop on Mongolian heritage I went to. And Anand and I, and maybe you do too, Dolgion, we both know Mendama, who's I guess a graphic designer and a bit of a heritage activist, perhaps.
Modern, contemporary.
That's right. Listeners might also know him from his Instagram account, Mongolian Visuals, which often posts historical, but you're right, Anand, in a contemporary way, so 60s to 80s photos, and juxtaposes them with the same corner in 2024. So the piece that was very interesting is this is a workshop series that is run by a bunch of youngish Mongolians, 4 Mongolians. I sort of snuck in as the weird foreigner.
Yeah, they're mainly for like young Mongolians to reignite their heritage of their roots, basically, like doing like a lot of traditional activities of like maybe actually setting up a gear and giving the names of all the traditional wares and knickknacks that Mongolians have. So, yeah.
I'd say a crowd of under 30s largely.
Yes.
It's always hard to tell ages when we're just looking at a group, but that would have been my guess, largely under 30. A full house, if you will. You have to register, you pay. It's weekly, and they've been going, I think this was edition 23 or so. They've been going since the fall. Very nice space that it's just an office building room that has been redesigned with some gear design features. The piece that really struck me, and it speaks to what Anna just explained about the project, these Mongolians under 30 looked at these photos that Medama put up on the screen and seemed to be totally amazed when they saw pictures of what's not even old Ulaanbaatar, but is sort of 20 years ago Ulaanbaatar. And they were fascinated. And I was fascinated in turn by their fascination, because it's always struck me that it's very difficult to have conversations with red heroes, Ulaanbaatarites, whatever you want to call residents of Ulaanbaatar, about the recent history of the city. So this is why the city museum is such a gem, because it documents some of the changes of the city and the layout and the topography, and even sort of not obvious but simple things like, well, in Urga, in old Ulaanbaatar, where was the Chinese district? Where were the Russian traders? And most people don't know any of this. Even though there are some markers that still exist, and you can certainly locate things on a map. And so this reinforced my sense of maybe this is common across rapidly growing cities and societies where that recent history sort of passes very quickly. And I saw it in the faces of these workshop participants who were mesmerized by, one image maybe that people might know that was particularly striking. If you walk down Peace Avenue past to the east, past the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the next building is a cute sort of little old building that, for example, the Zurich Foundation is in. The next building after that is sort of a shiny glass metal tower office building. Well, that used to be where the children's library was. And it was a kind of a pretty building with a tower. This is the photo that he showed as a juxtaposition of what does it look like today, what it did look like back then. And people were awestruck. And what that triggered in me was the observation about heritage and interest in heritage. But the other piece, as I walked away from the workshop and then walked around the next couple of days in the city, so striking that there are very few spots left downtown where you see the mountains. And when I first started coming to Ulaanbaatar now 20 years ago, the vistas were very present. Most places you could see chunks of the surrounding mountains. For downtown Ulaanbaatar, that is no longer the case, where the only sort of visual access are you can, from Sukhbatar Square, you can still look south towards Bogdan Mountain. But in many other places you find yourself, there are no vistas. And the landmark buildings that I was socialized with on visits are dwarfed by their surroundings. The State Theater. Yeah. What a grand pink building. Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ministry of Foreign Affairs it's dwarfed by its own annex that looms behind it, right? So the sense of our feeling in walking through the city and the expanse and where it used to be, what is so mesmerizing about being in the countryside, the wide openness, applied a little bit to Ulaanbaatar as a city years ago. But for the downtown core, or for Sesan, or for Yamak, that sense has disappeared.
I was born and grew up in an apartment building in downtown that has a very beautiful mosaic on its side. And when you look closely, it shows like Mongolia's beauty, natural beauty. And it's still there, but no one notices it, and it's really on the brink of collapsing. And on the opposite apartment, they blocked it with a massive advertisement announcement, just to show, I think, some like cream or something. So even not just a building, like massive billboards and advertisement spaces are also blocking all these views. So it shows like we don't really care about the heritage, the beauty, aesthetics, and it's all about functionality and maximizing efficiency or whatever of these spaces.
Yeah, I had the sense too. Like when I was a kid, I think I'd said this before. Like I always thought that innovation or like progress is like building tall buildings. That was my thing about like looking into Mongolia's future. But now I don't get the sense that I feel like these tall buildings are actually like rooting the image or the perception of what Ulaanbaatar is. Now, if we have all these other tall buildings, I think our identity of what Ulaanbaatar might be is gone. Okay, so to wrap it up, maybe Julian, can you give us a take for Ulaanbaatar 2026 visit?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's not a conclusion so much as fascination with ongoing changes, and they are changes, and they continue to be rapid. In some areas, like politics, for example, I think the scene is not quite fluid as it was 10, 15 years ago, but in terms of daily life, built infrastructure, but also some social changes. We talked about pedagogy, but also about contemporary art or heritage. Change continues to be rapid in Mongolia, and it continues to be both fascinating and joyful to observe.
Really? So my American take, I think, is even though when we live somewhere and we're part of it, it would be quite interesting to observe just the surrounding, just the kind of announcements, billboards, what is being advertised, what kind of restaurants are coming in, going, also what's absent, not just what's there, but what is missing or what used to be there is quite an interesting thing to keep observing. So I encourage listeners maybe for one day, just look around and think about those things and just reflect a little bit.
My main take is the only person who have lived here is don't take things for granted, and sometimes it's always great to have visitors who can point out the things that are like, oh, I never noticed that because I've been living through it and it didn't change. I didn't see the gradual change along the way. So that is my take of maybe have some friends who are living abroad and who can visit their country. Okay, and with that, we wrap up this episode of the Great Steel Mural, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you for listening. This is Anand. Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.
This is the Great State Mural, Mongolia Portrayed, where we take a look. Oh my god, I forgot the script. I'm so sorry. This is the first time I forgot what to say. Okay, sorry. Okay, I look at the script now. I think I usually can do this without a script. Somehow, just my brain just went a blank. Sorry, guys. Okay.